Yeah, so we're going to focus more on JavaScript today. Sorry for what you're saying now. So create a new window. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on talking more about creating what we call JavaScript models. As backend developers, there are a couple of things I think you need to understand about what you'll be working on, especially when it comes to building up classes, building up objects that would make your application code more functional. But we are first of all going to install something we call Node. I'm very sure you also did that installation in the last class, but we're going to do like a revision of that before I kick off with a couple of explanations, and then we can talk about we can work on some code base. Okay, so for now, I am quickly going to create a new window. So let's do that. So I'm very sure you already heard about Node.js. Basically, the reason why we are using Node.js at this point is basically to run JavaScript away from the browser. So the way JavaScript was actually designed is it's a language designed to run in your browser. Of course, you are aware of that. But right now we have this wonderful engine called Node, and Node is basically an abstraction, of JavaScript. It's built into this, engine with a couple of functionalities, a couple of methods. I mean, we're definitely going to look at that from the docs. But the idea is you need to, run JavaScript code away from the browser. So you should be able to, open up your terminal, open up the Node repo. So this is called a repo, and I will explain that as well. I'm going to zoom in on the terminal. So for those of you that are using a Windows machine, you should be able to do this from your command prompt or PowerShell, or you can also use some other tool like this is one of my favorites on Windows. You can use Commander, you can use what we call Git Bash. I'm going to send the link on the chat so you can install this and also play around with it. So you can install Git Bash, and the reason why I'm saying you should give this a trial is so that you should be able to run some of the commands that we are running as well, because a lot of us we are definitely using Linux, and definitely I believe some of you are using Windows, so you should be able to run some of the commands here as well. Okay, so you can go ahead and try this. I'm dropping it on the chat right now, so you can install any of these options. Okay, so that is Commander and also Git. By installing Git, you should have access to what's called Git Bash. Okay, so you can check it out, and if you have any issues with using any of these, you can drop your complaints, and someone will attend to you on the chat. All right, so let's proceed. Now, what I want you to do, if you're following through with me, is to go ahead and download the recommended version. We also have the current version, but it's always advised to go to use the recommended version. So you can download 16.13.2. This is the current version, current recommended version at this moment. But of course, new versions are always coming up. Every month, every week. Just always you have to be updated, right? You have to be updated. You have to make sure you're following through with the latest updates, the latest additions to Node, and of course you can see those updates by the time you check the docs. So just go ahead and click on this. I already have this installed, by the way. But once you click on this, if you're using a Linux machine, a Windows machine, or a Mac device, you should be able to save these. For now, this is the Mac package, so you should be able to save this on your laptop, and then all you have to do is double click to install. So it's very straightforward. I think I should also go ahead and download this. So I have this downloaded right now, and all I have to do is to click on this to start my installation. Of course, you're going to see like a different kind of interface while you are installing this, but basically it's a similar step. You just have to click on continue. So I already have this, right? You have to accept the license agreement, proceed with the installation, and then click on install to finalize your installation. Yes, so after installation, you can just go ahead and open up a new instance of your terminal to test. Let's go ahead and test this. So I am currently on the repo. I'm going to exit out of the repo, or maybe I can just open up a new terminal to test. So we can do node v, node then with a space -v. This is the command to see the version you're currently running. And the reason why you're seeing this version is because I intentionally had to downgrade to run some legacy application for a client. Sometimes we have some applications, but definitely if you install that version that I asked you to install, you should be seeing version 16 here. And the reason why you're seeing this is because I had to downgrade to run some legacy production application. I think some of their developers they've not really upgraded their system, and using version 14 or version 16 is not really compatible with their software. So that's the purpose of downgrading at this moment. All right, so this is to show you can definitely downgrade. You can use the latest version. You can downgrade depending on what you're trying to do and the project you're trying to work on. But now that we have Node installed, just by typing Node, it takes you into what we call the repo. Okay, so repo is basically an event loop. So the idea is, while you're in the repo, you should be able to run some commands and see immediate response from Node. So, for example, if you are used to doing something like console.log or console.table in your browser window, maybe you do it in JavaScript and you see the feedback in your browser window. At this moment, you can do this directly. So I can say we are having a backend class. All right, so just by logging this, I'm able to see, that immediate feedback right here. We're having a backend class. I believe you all can see this. I'm still going to zoom in again. All right, so we can run a couple of commands here where this is console.log, console.table. We can also go ahead and start installing packages, but we're not doing that right now. So the point is, we are going to be using Node for immediate execution of our code base without having to use the browser. That's why we are doing this at this stage, okay? So if you are confused about the concept of Node or what we are trying to achieve with Node, that is basically the answer. So go ahead, install Node. You can check out the documentation later on, but right now we're not doing that. Though we are definitely going to follow through on the documentation to make sure you understand the basics of Node before we start building up a lot of backend solutions and also giving you a couple of assignments. All right, so let's proceed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a link to what we are doing today. This is a link from the Mozilla Developers Network. So I'm going to drop this link right now on the chat as well. So you should be able to follow through on what I'll be doing here. Okay, so let's talk about the purpose of creating objects when building applications. Basically, you need to understand what objects are. So I'm going to do some explanations using using some diagrams here. So I believe you should this should make it easier for you to understand the concept rather than jumping into the code. Okay, so what are objects? Well, when it comes to building up software systems, when it comes to writing your programs, objects are just ways to describe entities that you're going to be working with. So I'm going to give an assumption. Let's assume we are working on a project to describe employee details in a company. We're working on the project, and the assumption is we're going to have employees, we're going to have the management, we're going to have the users, the users outside the organization also using this application. The best way to describe these users are to model them as objects. I just mentioned another keyword right now, model. So we are going to also talk about that. So we have objects, we have model. Okay, so we are working with objects, and the idea is to really model these objects to make sure it fits our use case or our business case. Okay, so you are going to hear some of these terms. Definitely, I'm going to explain this as well. So we have the business model or the business case, right? Okay, so I said an object is basically an entity, and of course, every entity has what we call properties or attributes. An example of this entity that I'm trying to use here, I said an employee. Okay, so I said an employee is an object. Of course, depending on the use case, right? Let's assume we're building this for maybe a company that is into task management, for example. You should understand that an employee is also a person. So, which means some of the properties you are expecting an employee to have are properties such as maybe full name or maybe first name. You are expecting an employee to have, last name, maybe age, maybe we have the departments within that company, right? So these are just assumptions. And when you're building your own project, of course, if it's a pet project, you're trying to learn something, you can work with assumptions. But if it's a real life, project, definitely some of these details would be gotten from the company or the client you're building that project for. So we have an employee as an object, and these are some of the properties of that employee. The first name, last name, the age, department. So you should be looking at things like dates employed, right? Dates employed, maybe salary, maybe tax. There are couple of properties we should be looking at when we're talking about objects. Sometimes you might, definitely have issues with trying to think of these things. I'm not going to say it's easy to, wrap up, the types of attributes or properties that your objects might have, especially when you're coming up with what we call a prototype, right? When you're trying to build up a prototype of a use case. So let's call this a use case prototype. So these are some of the keywords you've heard right now, and I'm going to explain them in details. Okay, so back to this, back to the object. Right now we have an employee. An employee has a first name, a last name, age, department, the date employed, the salary, and the tax. And I also said an object is basically trying to build up like this this model. Depending on the context, you're building up a model for your project or for your program or for your software. Okay, so what is a model? Now, a model is a bunch of code that you throw into your code base or your software to describe a specific use case. So, for example, you're trying to model the employee, and some of the things you might have. A model in this case is going to look more like what we call a class. So, a model is going to look more like what we call a class. And the idea of having that model is to put in some of the functionality after you've put in the attributes, of course, or the properties, is to put in some of the functionality. So I'm going to give an assumption here that we have a couple of properties, such as let's say the employee has to be able to check like tax estimation. Let's say the employee has to be able to set a tax. Or set a task, right? Let's say the employee has to be able to plan tasks. Now, these are just assumptions. Remember, they should be able to maybe schedule a task, right? They should be able to delegate tasks. Maybe it's an employee that has should I say a higher position within the company. So we have different levels of employees. Maybe some are just working on the ground floor, some are working on the executive position. So it means some employees should be able to delegate tasks, maybe not all, but some of them. We also have do a task, so some employees should be able to perform that task. Some employees as well should be able to track a given task. And finally, some employees should be able to report. So these are some of the operations that the employees should be able to perform. Okay, so Okay, so I'm going to break this down once more. We said a class. Now, what is a class? What does a class has to do with object? So remember, I said the object is basically used to wrap up your model, and finally, we are saying a model is more like trying to build up a class. Well, it depends on the programming construct or paradigm you're trying to follow. But of course, this is JavaScript. JavaScript is an object-oriented language. And you need to understand that when you're talking about object orientation, one of the major things you're going to be talking about is a class. Now, what is a class? All right. So in programming, a class is a pattern or a way to construct what we call objects. So now we're going back to this. A class is a way to construct this. Right now, an object is a model. In order to create a model, you need to definitely create a class. And finally, on our definition again, we're saying a class is a way to construct the object. So right now we have like the properties, we have the operations, and in the context of object-oriented programming, these operations can be referred to as methods, right? So right now we have properties, or you can call them your variable properties. So I'm going to zoom in on this in case you can't see it properly. So we have variable properties, or maybe you will definitely see some people also calling this like, attributes. And I mean, I'll tell you when you should call it attributes, when you should call it properties, but basically they're the same thing. I mean, we're referring to the same thing. So the next thing I have here is the methods. Okay, so the method is actually describing something that you know, but the reason why we call it a method in this case is because it is found within a class. So let's go ahead and just have this. Okay. All right. So we have the variables or the properties, and the variable or the properties is just basically referring to some of these items you're seeing here: the first name, the last name, the age, department, date employed, salary, and the tax. And the methods you're seeing here are some of these items, which are like the tax estimation, the set tax, the planned tax, and the rest of them. And I said the reason why we call them methods is because they're found within a class. But ideally, a method is very similar to what you call a function. What you call a function in JavaScript is just you having a bunch of code working together to deliver a specific task. And it's very good to make sure you have functions that are delivering that specific task. And in this case, they are similar. As you can see, tax estimation is going to give us tax estimation, of course, as expected. When you set a task, you should expect that the task should be set at the end of the day. So it's a simple method doing one thing. You also have a planned task. So in this context right now, I mean, it has to do with you, the programmer. You have to make sure you have like this. You have this framework for coming up with something solid and straight to the point, instead of having a method you call task estimation, and at the tax estimation, and at the end of the day, maybe that method is reporting a tax. It does not make much sense anymore to do something like that. So just try your best to make sure the description of a method is also depicting what the method is ought to do. All right, so that is it for the class. We're going to explain this from a practical standpoint as well. Now, let's talk about what we mean by business model. Now, we already said we are creating a model. What do we mean by business model? Ideally, when you're building up your projects, you should have some certain requirements, right? So the name of our company, as an assumption, the name of this company we can say is Top Universe. Top Universe organization. Now the expectation is we have employees, right? And from the business model, we have employees, and we are saying from a business standpoint, we have employees, and we are saying some of these employees are grouped into several categories, maybe such as engineers, for example, marketers. So this is just an assumption, right? We have, these categories of employees, and let's also assume that we have the administrators or the management, right? Management. So these are just different positions. Of course, they can be broken down. So that's why I said it depends on your business case. Right now, we're trying to describe the business case, and this is the positions we have within the company top organization. Now, the expectation is, each of these positions should be able to perform different operations. So that means you might actually have a model, but that your model should be able to, perform to assign different methods to each of these positions. Now, I'm going to break that down I don't want you to be confused at this point. But basically, what a business model is a description of what your model should do from a business standpoint, right? So if the business says that tax estimation should estimate tax, that means you have to implement a code base that really should estimate the tax for the employee. It's as simple as that, straightforward. And you working on a project, it means at the end of the day, you have to implement some logic to transfer the results you get from tax estimation back to the user. All right, so I believe that should be understood at this point. Now let's talk about what I mean by a use case prototype. Okay, so you are definitely going to meet a couple of engineers that focus on creating what we call prototyping. In this case, not design prototyping, but object or relational prototyping. So, giving an assumption again, talking about prototyping right now, we have an employee, and let's assume we also have another from our business logic. Let's assume we also have the business, right? Business or the company, of course. We should have relationships. I'm not going to specify properties of this business at this point, but there should be a reasonable level of relationship between the employee and the business. So this is more like trying to create that mental model from your own angle, or maybe from the business angle, to say, okay, so now we have an employee, we have a company, right? And what is the relationship between the employee and the company? And of course, the expectation is, to a business should have multiple employees, right? Employees are not really meant to own the business; they are part of the business, and you have to make sure you put all these things into context, or you have these things at the back of your mind while developing that system for the company or the clients. So you have the business, and you need to put in that relationship. So by default, you don't need to really add this here to say business or the business name. That's not necessary because of course this model is designed for this business. So the expectation is that the employee actually belongs to this business. Okay, so I believe you are with me at this point. So when we say use case prototyping or use case prototype, we're trying to describe using classes or building up classes that can actually explain the business case, building up multiple classes, and you're trying to showcase the relationships between these classes. Okay, so I just gave an example, and I believe you understand this example, but let's also assume that within this company, maybe at a certain point in time during the day, we are expected to give them lunch, for example. So we're expected to give them lunch, and there should be a relationship between the kitchen and the employee. And of course, the relationship is going to be stated by the business. It's a requirement that you should get from the business. So with an assumption that every employee should get one meal. So this is an assumption. So you say every employee should get one meal for lunch at a certain point in time. Maybe you have 12 p.m. Okay, so there should be a relationship between these two. And of course, as I said, that relationship should be defined by the company or the business. So this is going to be like a model of its own. This is another model. This is another model. Now, what is the relationship? The relationship here we're having is that an employee, of course, belongs to a business. The business has more than 0 or more employees. And when it comes to the kitchen, the relationship between the employee and the kitchen is that the kitchen is actually meant to give every employee at least one meal, right? At least one meal. And multiple employees are going to have several meals, of course, but every single employee should have at least one meal. And we can make an assumption that an employee has some sort of ID. Now, when the employee goes down to the kitchen, the expectation is that the kitchen has to take a record. You understand? The kitchen has to take a record of the employee they are giving the meals so that they will be able to keep track. So in that case, you see, we're going to have like a bunch of attributes and also a bunch of methods, right? So the methods would define which employee have you given a meal, and maybe you're going to grab the employee ID, the employee name, the employee department, and also the time the employee collected the food. So you see, instead of trying to use functions or make assumptions or write procedural code. Procedural code is basically trying to put in the context of the business into several steps like functions. Instead of doing that, you can actually wrap up this business model in form of objects, right? In form of objects where you end up having properties and methods. So that's what we mean by use case prototyping. All right, so that is basically some of the explanations I think you need at this point. Understanding objects, what it is, and what we're trying to describe. Understanding the model, understanding business model, and also understanding the use case of that specific model you are implementing. Okay, so at this point, we are going to go ahead to create a simple class. We're going to go ahead to create a simple class. Let's just test our code base. So what I'm going to do, let's test our environmental setup at this point. I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to navigate to the desktop. All right, so don't get any of this confused. This is just me trying to perform some operations from the terminal. I just navigate to the desktop, and I'm going to create a new directory. I'm going to call this JavaScript class, right? I'm going to jump into that JavaScript class at this point, and then we can just open it up in a new Visual Studio Code environment. So if you're using any other code editor, it's fine. You can definitely do the same thing with Sublime. I would advise you, work with us try to use the same code editor. But of course you can definitely do this with Sublime or any other code editor you have installed on your laptop. Okay, so let me ahead and create some basic files. I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call it for now. I'll save file. File created. I'm going to zoom in so you can also see that properly. Okay, so we have our JavaScript file at this moment. I have a couple of things installing here, and I believe you already have basic experience using VS Code. So of course we have our Explorer here. By clicking on this, we can view the files. We have the search option. We can search through this folder. Maybe through the comments. This is for source control, this is for debugging, this is for installing extensions or plugins into your environment or into your VS Code program. And finally, I have something here. This is just an addition. I added this myself. So there's some bunch of extensions you install, and you have them listed here for easy access. Finally, you have your account where you can sign in using a Microsoft account or a GitHub account. And finally, you have your settings to manage, of course, your settings. And I believe we all have a GitHub account at this moment. If you don't, try your best to create one. I'm going to go ahead and also drop github.com. We are going to use GitHub a lot. So please, if you don't have a GitHub account, go ahead and create a GitHub account at this maybe after the class, right? Maybe after the class. All right. So right now we have our main.js file, and what we want to do at this moment is to create a simple class. But I want us to test like the file with our Node installation for those of you that are installing Node for the first time now. So we're going to do that test right now. So let's assume we have console.log, and maybe we have a variable declaration. Let's name equals so we just console.log name, and I save my file, of course, with Control S. but you can click on file and of course click on save, or you can also turn on auto save, so you can have this your file saved automatically as you work. Ensure you save. If you don't have auto save turned on, ensure you save the file before you try to test. So now we're going to do node main.js, and now you see we have top universal, which means Node.js is working at this point. Also, when it comes to variable naming, I'm going to give you like a quick hint at this point before I proceed with talking about models and classes. When it comes to variable name, of course, I believe you should not start your naming with an integer value. Are you sure? Can any other person see my stream? Okay. Let's verify that. All right, so let me know if you can see it now. Someone said, please, how do we configure our VS Code to be seeing output in the terminal? Okay, so someone would answer that, but basically all you have to do is just have to open up your terminal, of course. You can use the control and, there's a backtick sign before the key 1 on your keyboard. There's this backtick sign. You can just scroll down control and hit that sign. So I'm giving my example, from a Mac use case, but I believe it should be the same thing on your Windows machine. Or you can just, from the command palette, you can open up. So if you can see my screen right now, from the command palette, you can also just open up the terminal, right? So you can open up a new external terminal or a new internal terminal. From the command palette by just typing in terminal. So I want to be sure everyone can see my screen. Go ahead and drop a comment if you can, so I can proceed, okay? All right, awesome. Okay, so I was trying to make you understand a couple of things about, naming your variables. Of course, I believe you already have experience with this, but just a quick reminder. Try as much as possible to make sure your variable names either start with a letter or maybe start with an underscore. So for JavaScript developers, working with Node or even front-end development, you might not want to do this so that other developers would, have a good experience going through your code base. You might just want to, start with the letter. And if you have like a couple of names, maybe you're trying to say full name. So I think variable naming in this context has to do with the language of choice. This is JavaScript, of course. And most JavaScript developers are used to the camel case, right? So most JavaScript developers are used to the camel case. And this is basically the camel case pattern of variable naming. So we have like let full name equals maybe marvelous. Just as an example, right? Some other patterns you can also follow is by using the underscore. You have full name like this, right? You can also have full name. This is valid. Also, you can have underscore full name. This is also valid. As a matter of fact, you can even have another underscore full name. But make sure you don't start with some alphabet or maybe some other special character. This is not going to work. Okay, so now we have full name, and yeah, let's stick with the JavaScript pattern. Okay, so this is full name, and we are going to change this to top universe. Okay, and at this moment, I'm going to call full name. So, all right, so as I can see on the chart, you can use the Control Shift and the backtick to open up your terminal on Windows. So just by pressing that, I have a terminal opened here. So I believe you can see this. This is the terminal opened up exactly at this on this directory level or on this folder level. So as you can see, we have desktop/JavaScript. So if I go ahead and list that I have here, we're definitely going to see main.js. It's quite slow. Yeah, we have main.js as the file we have in here. So if you have multiple files, just by using the ls command, you should also see the files you have in this directory. So I'm going to close this, and the reason why I'm using the external terminal is because I want us to have a lot of space, to see what we're building here. All right, so that is it for variable naming. Let's go ahead and we've tested this, right? And this works right now with our terminal. So let's go ahead and talk about creating models, right? Creating models or objects. Creating objects, because the model actually describe the activity. But at this point, creating objects and models. Okay, so from our use case on our diagram, we're talking about an employee. So when you want to create a class, right? A class for an employee, as you can see, this is what we have here. So let's try to follow what we have here, right? We have what we call the class keyword. Of course, the class keyword is used for creating that particular class. You have a standard name for your class, and then you follow through by adding the curly braces, right? The curly braces. So let's do that. So we have the class in our own context, employee, and we open and close this. We have this open and close curly braces, and right now you can go ahead and put in some of the things you need to put in here, from the variables or maybe the properties in this case, down to your methods, right? So the concept of class is actually very wide. There are a couple of things you need to understand from talking about the types of methods. We have a lot of things such as class methods, static methods. I'm not going to go into trying to break down some of these buzzwords right now, but the major thing I want you to understand is whenever you create a class in JavaScript, you should create a constructor. I mean, it's not compulsory, but it's good to initialize a new instance of a class. Now, what is an instance of a class? So let me go ahead and explain this before I show you. So whenever you create a class, so I'm going to explain this first off by talking once more, by saying something once more about, you have a variable and you have a variable initialization, right? So we have what we call variable declaration, and we also have what we call variable declaration. So we have variable initialization. Yeah, initialization. Some of these things I'm saying, the point is that you understand them. You're not going to be talking about it, of course, during your work, but you just need to understand them. So imagine we say let's A, and we end it there, not necessarily with the column, the column there, or the semicolon here. Sorry. So we can have let's A, and we can come down here to say A equals 10. So at this point, this is called declaration. And this is called initialization. Now, that does not mean, you can definitely do this in a line, of course, right? So, but you just need to understand the difference. So the moment you have the initialization and the declaration on the same line, it's still valid, very much valid. But there are some times you just want to maybe declare some sort of array, or maybe create an object, and then after creating this object, you later want to come in here and add some items into this object. So that's the difference, right? You have the declaration, you have the initialization stage. So almost similar, when we talk about our classes, you have what we call the blueprints. We have what we call the constructor. Okay, so basically the constructor is found in your blueprint, right? So the blueprint is you coming up with, like let me use the word framework, but that is also kind of like a buzzword. But let me use the word framework. So your employee, you need to initialize them. Then you have a couple of methods, a couple of operations that they can perform. In order to do that initialization while appending the properties or the arguments, you need to have what you call the constructor. So that's what you see here. We have the constructor, and then we can put in some of those properties such as so let's come back here to look for such as these properties, right? So you need to put in the constructor so that when you create a new instance, now the instance of this object or this class instance, the instance is you trying to create a version of this, right? So I'm going to use the word version. So for example, we can have marvelous. So say let marvelous equals so you can use, of course, the new keyword, or I'm very sure you can also initialize it directly from here at this point. The moment you call this, let's say you have the new employee and you start putting in the attributes. So at this point, we only have one attribute. We only have any. And the reason why we're saying any, of course, is because we didn't put in a data type. But I mean, that is not necessary in JavaScript, because it will definitely determine that at compile time or while interpreting your code base. So right now, we only have this constructor, which is name, but I'm going to change this. I'm going to have the full name, and I'm just going to use maybe three of these options here. So I'm going to use first name, last name, age. So let's go ahead and do that. First name, using a camel case, of course, last name, and age. So now the question is, why are we also doing this? Why are we also saying this dot name equals name, or this dot first name equals first name? What is the point exactly? Okay, so that leads us to talking about another level of abstraction in here, and the reason why we are saying this dot first name equals first name is we are trying to set the value that was passed in from the user, or maybe from the programmer, or from our new instance. At this point, we are trying to pass in that value, and we're trying to pass in that value directly into the prototype. So I don't want to use some of those keywords because I still haven't explained them yet. But this is basically accepting this value in here and giving it giving it this sort of description, right? Just giving it this sort of description and saying, okay, the value that comes in here should actually be the first name. Now, what does that mean? That actually means that we can rename some of these items here and pass it to the top here. So maybe I can have something like name, right? And I can say this dot name, right, equals first name. So what is actually going on here is, if we pass in a first name, and I'm going to pass in marvelous. If we pass in the first name here to your class, this first name is actually going to be considered the name, because you said this dot name. This refers to the context by which you are referring to. So right now we are referring to the class. If you have this inside if you're working on maybe you're using React, for example, we're not talking about front end, but if you're using some other, maybe like a function, and you're trying to refer to this, maybe you're calling some kind of function, it can be synchronous or asynchronous, and you refer to this, you might actually be referring to the context of that particular scope, right? So that also leads us to another thing. What do I mean by scope? I'm going to also explain that before we continue. Okay, so right now I just changed this in here. This dot name equals first name. It means by the time we call marvelous, for example, we call console dot log, and we call marvelous. By default, printing this is going to just give us like an object. So so I think there is a mistake here, and the unexpected identifier. So we're going to fix that. I think it should be from here. I'm going to verify this right now. Let's see where that problem is coming from. Maybe I have to, let's see. See what I have now. Okay. still have a problem. Apologies. Try to figure this out. Let's try to figure this out. Okay. So I think there was actually a problem with the pattern I used in describing that variable. I'm going to quickly fix that now. Okay, JavaScript. 1 minute, please. Okay, so so what I just discovered is it was actually, it had to do with probably the version of the node I'm currently using to run this. That is what I am figuring out at this point, because I think I just tested this on a different machine and it happens to work. And of course there are different patterns of creating. There are different patterns of creating your classes. So you can have your variable and your value also assigned to the class. Surprisingly, it does not work that way in here, and that is I believe that has to do with the version of the engine I'm using. So also I wanted to confirm this from your end. Let's verify. Francis, I want to confirm this from your end. I want to be very sure that the problem is coming from my engine. Okay, so let me go ahead and give this and try another example. I'm going to put a constant value. Let's see what happens here. Aha. Okay. So I want to believe that this is as a result of the engine I'm currently using. Okay, so let me just proceed with the standard here because of the version I have. So I do, I create the constructor first name and I just append this directly to the first name. So I said this.firstName equals first name. And I went ahead to print the object. So I went ahead to print the object, and we have the description of that particular object, telling us that the class we created. I believe you can see my screen. I can notice a lot of people are kind of like disconnecting and connecting again. So this is telling us that, okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's from the version. So I did not expect that version 10 could not cannot actually execute that. Okay. So we have the employee and we also have the first name, Marvelous. So this is just giving us, that is telling us that this is what we've created. But if you have if you are able to do this from your hand, say maybe name, and maybe you change this to this.name equals first name. At this point, you should be able to call marvelous.name, which should give you the value of what you've already called the first name. So don't allow this confuse you. Unfortunately, I really can't show you this at this moment, but I believe you have the latest the recommended version of Node. So go ahead and test this, and definitely this should work for your code base. I'm going to stick with this right now. So you can actually test this right now. Let's change this to first name, and what we can do, let's see, we can call this.first name. This should work, and now you can see we have Marvelous trying to call the exact description of this our constructor. So this means we can have multiple constructor items in here. We're also going to test that. So let me quickly see if I can install or reinstall or change the version of my node. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to change the version of my node very fast. Okay. Okay, so how am I able to install multiple versions of Node on my machine? I use something called NVM. I don't want you to think of that right now, but it's possible to have different versions and manage different versions of Node. So let's see if I still have. Oh, right. Okay, so I still have NVM installed. So I'm going to quickly change the version. and I'm going to do, let's see, npm ls. Okay. So I can see I have 16.13. Okay. npm change node version. Yeah, so some of these commands, you might not, remember some of these commands just like me. I can't remember the exact npm code command to change this, but I think I just figured that out right now. So we have npm use, and I can just say 16. I need to see if that works. So now we're using node version 16. Oh, okay, great. So node v, awesome. Okay, yeah. So I just changed my node version, and of course, I really want to test the previous code base and verify where that problem was coming from instead of making assumptions at this point in time. So let's do the name, and let's also say this the name. So we need to verify what the problem is exactly. Name. I'll go ahead and run this again. Okay, so as you can see, the problem was actually the version of Node I was using. Yeah, so surprisingly, that the company project I'm working on is still running on Node version 10, though I'm going to do an upgrade for the company, and that was the reason why I had to downgrade, just to be able to run their legacy project. I think they built since 2015 or so. I can't remember. Okay, so this is what I was trying to explain. As you can see, we are no longer accessing this using first name, but at this point, we're accessing this using name. Of course, we have some things, such as public and private properties, but we're not going to talk about that now. Let me quickly explain what I mean by some of these items, right? So a class blueprint, as I said earlier, is basically, you trying to have that container, that visual container that describes your class, which is what we've created at this point. We have the blueprint, we have the visual container describing our class, though our class does not really do anything at this moment. And, when we talk about methods, you can go ahead and put in some of those methods within the class, such as the, task estimation, set task. So let's just route that in. Let's do that very fast. So we have we have some of those methods such as task estimation. So I'm just going to do this, right? Yeah. So, and I'm going to return task estimation. So this is just like returning a string. So we have set task. Please go ahead and drop your questions while I'm doing this. So you don't necessarily need to understand everything I'm doing, and that's the point of asking questions. So you won't say I don't understand what they did in the last class. Ask your question now and let's clarify this. Okay. So we have setup. We have let's just use 3 of this for now. So we have plan task. Okay, and I'm going to also change this to plan task. Now you see we have what we call methods, and I said earlier that these are also what you might describe to as functions, but the reason why they become methods, of course, is because they are found within the class. So when you have a function that is found within the class, it becomes a method, and of course you are expected to return something, but I mean it's not compulsory. You might have a method that just performs a specific operation without returning something. Maybe you just do console.table. So we're going to try something here. I'm going to turn off the return statement, and I'm going to explain, the difference between using return and just performing a direct execution within the method. Okay, so let's go in here, and I believe we can have multiple. So we have like name. We're going to stick to first name to avoid having some sort of confusion here. So let's say we have the first name, we have last name, and we also have age, right? First name, last name, and age. Okay, so right here, I say I'm expecting the first name, the last name, and also the age. So I can say this, the first name equals first name, you repeat the same thing. Last name equals last name. And finally, age, right? So I'm just doing a bunch of copy and paste here. So this dot age equals age. So now we have our constructor defining, the properties of our class, assigning these items to what, they expect from you. So when you pass in something, let's say I pass in marvelous, for example. now this first name automatically is assigned to Marvelous. Of course, you can't do this like this, but just trying to make sure you understand what we're passing in there. Okay, then we also you need to also understand that this keyword can be replaced, meaning you can actually assign this into some other variable. That's why JavaScript is actually very flexible. We're not going to do that, but you just have to know that it's possible. So we can assign maybe like self. So we can say let's self. Of course, not outside like this, but I'm just showing you what you can do with JavaScript. Because this, you can definitely change this, and then at this point you can proceed by using self. So, but that's not something you would want to do, at least at this stage. You just need to understand that it's very dynamic, and definitely that is achievable. Okay, so by saying by having this, we'll have this blueprint defined, and here we can say console.log table, and then we can call maybe this dot first name, this dot last name. Okay, so why am I using console.table? So I'm just using console.table to show you. Of course, it can be console.log, right? So they're just a way to print out some of these items on the console. So we can call .tax exclamation. So marvelous .tax exclamation, and we can actually call this just like a quick test to see what we have. So of course we're just seeing the estimation there. So maybe I have to do this, and let's see what we have. We have marvelous, okay, marvelous and undefined. That's because we just passed in marvelous. So in order to call that method, this is the way you call the method, of course, from the instance, right? This is our instance because we said marvelous is now an employee, and in order to call that, in order to call this method, you just have to call marvelous.tax estimation. Yes, so the reason why we got undefined, of course, is because we only passed in one data, like the first name. Meanwhile, we also have, the last name and the age that was not passed in. So we can pass in the last name, I can use Solomon, and I can also pass in the age of 50. And, now you see, I did not pass this as a string. Let me bring out good. So I passed this, more like a number or an integer. But JavaScript, of course, does the naming the data type for you. So it handles assigning this to the right data type. And now I think if we should print this, we should get marvelous and Solomon. And of course, also with the table function or with the table method I was trying to use, I think I am supposed to wrap this. I'm not certain, but I feel I'm supposed to wrap this. I think the table works with objects, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, I believe you know how to create your objects, right? You know how to create simple objects. Yes. So we can have like first name. There are so many ways to do this. I'm just trying to, use the first name. So what we're just doing here is we're creating an object. Not necessary, in this in our use case, but we just need to know that, things like this are possible. Let's see what we have now. So right now we have, our table showing us the index and the value. All right, so this is practically not useful at this moment. You just need to understand that we have our methods, and of course you can put in your business logic in here at this point. So you can put in your business logic for tax estimation, for setting tasks, and all right. So why do we need to create a bunch of statements? We call this our employee class, and we are also calling this a model. Now, the importance of creating this model is it's quite easier to work with data. It's quite easier to play around with data to see the relationships between different set of data, and to actually organize your code base or to organize your project. So there's so much advantage to using object-oriented programming than you're using procedural. But at the same time, I would say one is better than the other. I would just say it depends on what you are trying to achieve. We have a lot of paradigms, and object-oriented is just one of them. A lot of companies will definitely require that you understand or at least have a level of understanding about objects even before you can be employed. So this is something that you really have to look into. It's very critical. So just make sure you understand object orientation and classes. Okay, so now what's the class blueprint? That is what we've seen here. This is actually a blueprint. This defines the the operations that we are going to perform in here. This defines some level of standards from your variable naming to also the methods, right? And that is called a blueprint. Now, what is the constructor? This is the constructor, and the constructor basically defines the kind of data that comes in when you initialize or when you create an instance, right? So this is basically accepted by the constructor. And if you have like a bunch of operations you want to perform whenever you create a new instance, not necessarily when you call the methods, right? When you create this instance, you can actually perform some operations here. So you can actually perform some operations. I don't know what it is at this point, but definitely it depends on the business case. As I said earlier, it is possible to always construct that instance in here, right? So we just did a very basic level of construction by assigning what we get here into this point. Finally you can add some things in here before we define our method. So that is basically what the constructor is. Now, what is the instance? The instance is basically the new copy, right? This is a copy, so we just created a new copy, and that is to make you understand that we can have. So let's assume we have another person called Marvelous 2. Let's assume this is Marvelous 1, and we have Marvelous 2. We should be able to create Marvelous 2 as a new employee, and maybe we have Marvelous 2. We have Solomon 2, and also the age 60. And so at this point, let's not talk about the method. We just want to print the two of them and see how similar they are. So right now we created new instances, and we just printed out the entire object or the entire instance. So we have this shows us that this is an employee type, and these are the values that were passed in. So this is for Marvelous 1, right? So we just logged this and we said, let's do Marvelous 1. And I'm going to wrap this up as a string, just like this. Okay. So I'm going to explain what I'm doing here, but not a big deal. So let's also do the same thing here. All right, so don't get this confused. Don't be confused by what I've done. What I've done basically is just trying to wrap in this object in here. I just wrapped in this particular object into. So I think this is called concatenation. Trying to wrap in some kind of objects or some kind of strings together. The reason why we get this as an object basically is because you're not meant to do this if you want to display this item. But of course, we can call these items age, first name, plan task estimation. So you can definitely. I believe this should work because we are returning a string, right? So let's see what we have here. So we have tax estimation. And, wow, we just called the entire. Yeah, we need to do this. Correct. Yeah, so to call that properly, we need to put in the open and close parentheses. Okay, so and we can just say task estimation. Maybe we can also append the age in here. So you can actually append the age. So what I'm doing here, I'm using the backtick, right? When you use this sign, you should be able to append variables. Yeah, so I'm just going to call this you should be able to append some of these properties into this. So this is valid for doing a concatenation. There are other ways to do concatenation in programming. You can basically use the plus. You can have a bunch of stuff looking like this. This is also very similar, but this does not make your code very neat. But definitely you can do this. So this is a string plus this is another string. So this is basically what I'm trying to achieve. With this, with this. So let's just take this off and let's call this.age. All right, so we just said task estimation, this.age. Of course, just as an example to show you Marvelous 1, task estimation 50, Marvelous 2. So just to show you that we actually have two, different instances, and we can point to the specific properties of those instances. So these are the instances, right? And we printed the instances pointing to some specific properties. All right, so that is it for creating a basic class. Also, I think finally I was trying to explain the point of scope. So just imagine you have like a function. You have a function. I can just say function. Of course, there are multiple ways to do this. Let's see, function my function. So you have a function, and you're trying to utilize this depending on what you're working on, depending on the way your function constructor is actually or your function. Should I say? Sometimes, depending on the type of function you're creating, we have multiple ways to create functions. We have the way you can create this using what we call arrow functions, which is also great. So we can have like maybe let my function equals. I think this is also valid. So using this is actually referred to as a scope. So whatever comes in here is your scope. And if you have something similar, maybe like function 2. So let's assume you have a as a parameter, or maybe like name as a parameter, and let's say, yeah, that's also referred to as an argument, of course. So you have my function 2, my function 1. This is the scope. So imagine you also have name in here. So of course, when you refer to name here, you are definitely going to be pointing at this name and not some other name you created somewhere. Even if you have name at the top here. So this is just like trying to describe a scope. At this level, this can be described as a variable on the global scope. And at this level, this can be described as a variable on the local scope. Yeah, so as a matter of fact, you can also have like this in here, right? And you're still referring to this as the local scope. So this is what you have, as a local scope, and definitely you can call this the global scope. Okay, so scope just describes the level at which the particular item is located in, if it's global or local. And when it's local, you work with it within that scope. You don't expect to call name. When you call name, you don't expect to see the value you passed in here. Of course, you expect to see what you have here, on the global level, and not this. So because this does not really have direct access into the scope, except you call the function, right? So you just need to understand some of these things, and scope is very important. So you would avoid, by understanding the meaning of scope and how it works, you can definitely avoid like a lot of problems. All right, so I'm going to show you how to, of course, work with some of the things we've described here. I believe you understand what I mean by a blueprint, the constructor, the instance, and also the scope. You also understand, what an object is, what a model is, and, creating models, you have to implement classes. Then you also need to have your variables or the properties of that class declared, and also the methods, right? Then finally, I also spoke about business model, which is the use case. I spoke about creating a prototype, which is prototyping, not necessarily a class prototype, but more like from this context, we're talking about trying to prototype a real implementation of the system. So let's go ahead and do this once again, given the values we have. So now we're going to implement a simple class. Then maybe we can talk about a couple of things about, we can talk about a couple of details about classes such as inheritance, encapsulation, and some other things. So for now, let's just create a class, right? So let's create our class employee once again, and remember that the class keyword starts with a small letter C, not a capital letter C. Okay, so next we are going to define some of these things by giving our constructor. Also going to just define them outside. First name, last name, age, department. This is not compulsory, but maybe you have like some sort of advanced implementation that you want to do. You can actually use this to make sure your work is clean, and other developers should understand what you're working on as well. So we have. So this is quite strange. Wow. Yeah, sorry, it's so awkward that from a list of 3 different networks, we are still having the same problems. From all the network providers we have in our dear country. I mean, apologies for that. I believe you can see my screen now, right? Can you? Yeah. Sorry about that. So I think what we have to do at the end of the day is to also fix the stream to avoid putting this up directly for you on YouTube. Okay, so let me continue with what I'm trying to show you. So we have the department, we have the dates employed, we have salary, we have tax, we have business name. Okay, so one thing that I've seen a lot of developers, in the past, trying to do is instead of creating like a bunch of items here, sometimes they tend to just, pass this in as a simple object. So I've seen this several times, and I'm going to explain what I mean. So ideally, this is what you might, want to do. You have a first name, you have your last name. So let's bring this out as well. We have a last name, we have an age, we have department, we have date employed, we have salary, we have tax, and also the business name. Okay, so this is our, we can just start saying this.id because ID. So I'm just going to duplicate some of those things, and I'm just going to rename some of them. Let's see, last name, age, departments. Okay. So I just did some duplicates again, and date employed. And trust me, this is very important when it comes to working with objects. I think we have a couple of mistakes here. So this is the business name, and finally tags. Okay, all right. So I think we do we have any mistakes here? I don't think so. All right. So now we have our constructor. So what I was trying to say is, in the past, I've seen most developers instead of doing this. I believe you can still see my screen. Instead of doing this, they tend to just work with a simple object. So let me also show you that. So we have a new file named 2. So some of them tend to just use like data, and they tend to just pass in like the data in here. So, and the thing about this is you might now have to probably create when you create a new instance, this should be employee, right? So let's fix that here as well. So yeah, by default, when you want to create a new instance of the employee here, this is what you do. So we can say employee 1 equals new employee. And now you see, when I put in the parentheses, VS Code tells us, it's telling us, okay, we have to put in a lot of these things in order to have this completely set up. The thing is, if you make any mistake and you skip any of this, JavaScript will still throw out the data for you. The thing is, it will just show that particular item as being undefined, but it's good to. That's why some people tend to use TypeScript, to make sure they fix all these issues. But you can also have a clean code if you just ensure that the data you are putting in here is valid. So let me go in here and just put in 1 as the ID. First name, I'm just going to put Marvelous once again. This time let's just put John Doe. That's our last name. Age 50. Department, we can say engineering. So as you can see, while I'm putting these items, where it's actually like showing us this on our code editor. The next item, the date employed. Hold on. Let's see. Okay. All right. So we have salary. So salary can be 1,000. What else? What else are we missing here? So I think we're also missing the tax, and our tax is maybe like 10%, maybe, or 5%. And then the business name, we can say top universe. Okay, so now we have our object properly constructed. If I should go ahead and just console the table, and I decide to check out the employee one. So let's see what we are going to have by printing this item. So as you can see, with console.table, I'm able to construct this item properly. And the moment we start working here, we can say, okay, we need a specific detail from our employee one. It can be like the employee one department, just to see the departments. We can do this, as you can see. Let's log this instead of table. So basically the same thing, right? So we have the table here, and we can get the department, as you can see. So we can say let's department equals so I'm just trying to wrap this up into like a string, as I explained earlier, by putting it just like this. Okay, so we have this as a department, also log department. All right, it's beautiful. So now this is the department. So we can just print these guys, right? We can just say department. We can say business name, organization, right? Organization. And we can say employee dot business name. So all right. So I think there's a mistake. What is the mistake? We have department has already been declared. Okay, that's good. So we have business name and console business name. Okay, good. Okay, so we have the entire item, and then we have the department and the organization. All right, so this is basically what we've done so far. Imagine you're trying to save this detail to a database. When we get there, all you have to do, probably you can say save to DB, depending on how you choose to implement if you're using Mongo or Postgres. Sometimes we don't advise that you wrap up your database implementation into your model. Instead, you have to do that in a different file. So maybe you have like a different file, then you have to call that in here. Definitely, we're going to show you how to do that. But for now, we want you to understand modeling, right? So we just created a model, and this is what our sample looks like. Let's go back to main 2, which is this. And I tried to explain that you might want to have your model look like this. Maybe you don't want to define like a bunch of keywords here describing one model. You might want to pass in this item as an object, right? So you pass this item as an object. Sometimes it can be an object like this. So I'm going to show you. We have like employee object equals, and we are going to construct this object right now. I'm going to probably just bring in some of these items from here. So we have this bunch of items. Of course, I'm going to change these details, right? So I'm going to change these details. I'm going to have ID equals a specific value, first name equals specific value. So let's just go ahead and remove these keywords here. Okay, so I think values, I'm not mistaken. Okay, so I'm just going to put in, let's have this empty. Okay. All right. Yeah, I really love to wrap this up in strings, because I'm just trying to show you basically the kind of data you would expect from the front end sometimes, or if you're using Postman. But we'll get there, and I'll tell you why I'm doing this. But I don't think, as a JavaScript object, I don't think it's compulsory to put this into the quotes. I don't think it's compulsory at all. So let's assume we have like those data in here. Maybe like we say ID is 2. This was used John Doe 50 engineering, date employed. Did I make that mistake here? date employed. Oh wow, okay. So I think I also made that mistake there, but let's correct it here. So we have 10, 20, I think that was what I did. Salary, we just 500. And the task, maybe like 5%, business name, top universe. Okay. All right. So now we have this object. We've created this object, and I think we can pass in the object in here if we go ahead and create a employee one equals new employee. And then we have our data, which is basically what we're expecting. So if we have print data, for example, and then we have, or let's say, return data. So we can return this data. Okay, basically you can also just print it out by calling data, of course, but I'm just doing this. So employee object, console.log employee one dot now I think what we're seeing here is we passed in the employee object. Now we'll say employee one dot data. Let's see what we get by running this. So you see we get that bunch of data that we created. If we also do this, we're still expecting to get basically the same thing. So let's see. Yeah, of course, basically the same thing. And what if we want to select a specific item from this data? So I think at that point we have to probably, let's see if we can use the dot notation here, .id, we get 2. Of course, this works. Definitely, in some languages, you have to do this. And of course, I believe this should work as well, if I'm not mistaken. So let's test that. Of course, it also works. So you see, we have different ways to access different, to access the same type of data, especially when it comes to JavaScript. This is valid. So we see we have 2. We access it using both the dot notation and also try to get like the ID. Try to use like the index. So let's also try first name. So we're going to run this again. So first name John, and if we also do the first name, we should also have John. So basically, working with objects in JavaScript is great because objects, or maybe even if they are JSON objects, they are actually like first class citizens of the language, and it makes it very easy to play around with them. So some people might prefer to do this because, of course, you have like a short blueprint, but this might also cause problems, right? This might cause problems because you did not clearly define this, and I mean, at some point, this becomes kind of useless because you are not really like working with the objects, like the details of the objects, except you have to start calling those details of those object details, like this. And of course, you might make a mistake, or some other developer working with this might make a mistake. And definitely, this would now give you undefined because, of course, you don't have that value. So I would advise you to stick to this, but it depends. I mean, if you have like a ton of data coming in. Of course, when you start working with models, you would learn, as I said earlier, relationships. So you would learn to really like break things down into their separate models. So maybe you can have a model communicating with this model, or then this might also bring you down to the concept of inheritance, right? This might bring you down to the concept of inheritance. So most of the things we've done from the link I shared with you, you can see they are also similar. As you can see, as I said, we can also omit the constructor. So you can actually have a class without the constructor. And you just create a new class, you call the methods, they perform a specific thing. Maybe you are just creating a class. So sometimes I think I usually create classes like this, most especially when I'm working with what we call settings or preferences, because we don't need to initialize a new settings. We don't need to initialize a new preference. We just need a blueprint that can aid us, save items from to the database. We just want to have that very good, construction of our model, right? So like the settings model, settings.js, and we can have something like this. So we can have get settings. We can have save settings, right? And maybe we're passing in some sort of data. So we don't necessarily need a constructor, right? So we just, let's just return that data. Also return this data. So we did not really use the constructor here because we're not expecting to really construct, much. The expectation is just to, perform some things like getting a specific data, or maybe you might even want to get a specific data. So you can now have things like get specific data. That's an assumption, and maybe we call in the key, we pass in the key, and from the key we can also do this, passing the key in here. So of course, the problem with this is because we don't have a constructor, you can't actually just point into what you have here. Remember what I said by having scopes, right? So at this moment, you might want to now bring in the constructor. But another thing is, what you might try to do here is maybe you plan to bring the data from your database or something. So you can say data equals database.get data. So let's just assume you have a separate method getting you the bunch of data, and at the end of the day, the data might look more like this. When you get this data, it might look more like this. So you can have like a team, maybe dark. By the time you get this from database, right? So you can have more like maybe. Yeah, since we're talking about settings here, let's just stick to team. But there are a bunch of settings you can have, and by the time you pass in the key, all you have to do is to call the data and the key. So if we pass in a key, we say get specific data. So I can create a new instance, or maybe inst. Let inst, which is instance equals new settings. So of course, when it comes to this use case, I even see no reason why there's a way you can actually construct this, to avoid always initializing like a new object. You can always create a new object at the beginning of your code and use that same object, because all you're doing is, getting specific items. And, in that case, you need to really focus on working on what we call concurrency. We'll talk about that in some other class. So we can just say we have like new settings, and so of course after creating this, we can just say inst dot get specific data, and we say we want to get the team. So whether we use a single quote or double quote, still works. So what happens is we're going to return the data and that specific key. So let's see what we get if we say what is the team. So let's equals this, and we just console.log team. Let's see what we get if we call settings. Let's see. So you see we get dark. Okay, so that is because we got this item from the database. We passed in the key. So in case you don't understand what I did, I know I was very fast here, but let me explain. So we have get specific data. Of course, as I'm just trying to show you, how you can create like a settings class so that you can fetch things properly. You see, our code is just straight. We create a new setting. We define the team. We get that specific team as a key. From the bunch of data we might collect from our database, and at the end of the day, we'll return the data. And we'll return that particular item, by just calling the data and also passing in the key. So now we're getting team, and this will be passed in here. So when we say data key, we're going to actually replace this with team. And if you look at this very well, what we have here, the value is, this is, the property, and the value here is dark. So imagine we have, multiple items. Maybe we'll say background team, and maybe we'll say editor team, and maybe this is light. Then maybe we'll say user, maybe we'll say default color. So we have a bunch of settings right now we're getting from our DB, and then we can access these values, using the keys, right? So we can say the background team. We're getting these values straight from the DB. So that from the class, right? So, but of course, the class is going to fetch it from the DB. So we have the editor team. We have the default color. We just need to play around with some things here, and we just have this in here. I think it should be okay. Editor team. Okay, so right now we can just say console.log, our background team, our editor team, and finally our default color. All right, and if we go ahead and test this, let's see what we have. So you see we have dark, light, black, of course, based on the properties we set here. We're just printing everything in here. Yeah, so basically this is working with classes without specifically creating the constructor. So another thing we can start, talking about now is constructors, but we're going to create videos covering this section and breaking it down. Inheritance. I'm just going to give you like an overview of what these things are. When it comes to classes, when it comes to working with classes, let's go back to let's come back to this tool. Let's explain a few concepts, you don't necessarily need to. Most of them are, mostly important when you start implementing, some kind of complex models. But there are some things you need to understand, about inheritance, about polymorphism. That's correct. Can spell. Yeah. And also something like encapsulation. Now forget about the huge terms. I'm definitely going to break down some of these things once more in the next class. But the idea about inheritance is, trying to inherit properties and methods from another object. So imagine you are trying to build an application for, of course, for a company. We have a model, we have a class, person class, and then we are trying to break down what are the types of persons that we should have in this company. So we have the employee, we have the administrator. I mean, they're also the employees, but let's see. Let's call this like a normal user. Let's call this an administrator. Let's call this let's just say we have cleaners, or maybe some other kind of, let's say, editors, right? So let's say we have different types of users, and by default everybody falls under the user category, or maybe like the person. So from the person, you have some children, which are these items. Or I think it's better if I draw the diagram this way. So these guys are inheriting from the person. This guy is inheriting as well from the person, and this item is also inheriting, some properties from the person. So what this means is, we can have a person class, and we can have these other classes, these other items inherit, right? Inherit from this person. So let's just do a quick implementation, but we're not going to buttress on this right now. We're definitely going to do that in the next class. And I'm also going to show you how to create an account with repo.it. I think it's repoit.com. Yes. So I'm going to show you how to do that, so I can give you a take-home assignment, and I'll be expecting you to submit it via your Repo.it link. So let's just create something we call inheritance. Yes. Okay, so this is going to be quite simple, quite straightforward. I'm just going to bring in a sample of this first from what we have on the developer network on Mozilla. So we have like a professor, and as you can see, we're extending the person class. What we're doing here is we already have the class person, and then maybe we have some details. So if you look here, we are collecting the name so we have like the name. Maybe we'll probably have a constructor name. I'll say this.name, equals name. Okay, so we have like a person class, and then we created a professor. So of course, a professor is a person. The professor should have a name, but we're not working with that name in here. Rather, we are creating. We are collecting it from the person. So we are extending the property here. Now you might be saying, I mean, this is very basic. Why don't I just put in the person here? Now the reason is because sometimes the parent class might have a couple of functionality that you want to abstract away from that particular user type. Maybe because you don't want the users to be able to do specific things. So I'm going to assume that we have a person and we have a user, we have an admin. So let's just go ahead and create this. I'm going to take off this item. And I'm going to assume that, I mean, what can a user do basically? So we can have a user set preference, for example. preference sets. Okay, so we can have a user set, their preference. So let's take this off. Let's take this off, and let's just say preference, right? So this preference is going to act more like an object preference. I will say this dot preference equals preference. And now we are taking this from, we say super name, because we're actually extending person. Let's call this full name. Okay, so let's call this full name. Okay, so what we are doing here is we have a class person, we have a class user, and we're extending person. And every user should be able to set preference. But let's now assume that we have another type of user which happens to be like an admin, right? So administrator, and there are some things that the administrator should be able to do, though an administrator has a full name as well, right? So an administrator can even have more than this set of details. Like, I mean, the two type of users can have full name and maybe position. Because we can also have position. So this is just an assumption, it's not necessary, but I'm just trying to show you can have multiple items that they are inheriting from. You have the same position, same this the position, this okay, this the position equals position, and then you can also inherit that position. So I believe you can just have you can inherit these two items. Also you can inherit this way. But now we have these two items inherited from the parent class, which is the person, because they are both extending person, and now they have let's say the administrator should be able to do something more complex, like delete a user, maybe delete. So we can say maybe we are passing. Let's say we are passing a bunch of data when we want to delete that user. So we can have like delete mistake, delete user. So but by the time let's just return user deleted. Okay, so by the time you're working with you're working with this model, and you create a new user, user one equals new user. So let's assume you create a new user and you put in the user data. Of course, we're not doing that. Instead, we're passing in just the preference. The user would not have access to something like delete user. So you see, when I come in here and I say user one dot, we only get set preference and not delete user, because this is just a user. So this person cannot delete a user. They can only set their preference actually. And then we need to put in, some string, I believe. Okay, we're not passing anything here, but I mean, we can definitely do that to pass in some items. When we say user two is an admin, for example, what you see here is we can have user two. Let's see, user two dot. Oh, okay. We also have set preference. Okay, that's not a bad idea, but that's not what I wanted to show. So we have, we have delete user. Is that correct? Oh yeah, on top here we have the delete user. So user two, which is an admin, can delete user. User one cannot delete user. Actually, this will not work. So user one cannot delete a user because, of course, all they can do is set a preference. But user two can delete a user because that's part of what they can do here. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you, I can decide to take this off. I can decide to take this off. I'm just showing you that, by extending this, you can actually get to see, get to use some of the properties you have here, be it property or methods, maybe like save details. You can definitely achieve details save maybe. So you can definitely, use this form of inheritance to do all the basic things you need to do as a person, right? But at the same time, use this to set some level of some boundaries, right? Some level of actions or permissions. What can a normal user do? A normal user can set their preference. They can delete their account, maybe their own personal account, right? So delete my account. A normal user should be able to delete something, to delete their own account. But an admin can actually delete a specific user, maybe giving that particular user ID, right? So an admin can only perform the tasks that an admin should perform, and then there's a level of boundary here right now. So a user cannot access, a user cannot delete any other user, but an admin can delete any user of its choice. So basically, that is inheritance in action. Yeah, so we also have polymorphism encapsulation. Those are more complex things, talking about data hiding and playing around with data. There are so many other types of there are so many other things you need to know when we talk about OOP, object-oriented programming. But at this point, I think we'll have to stop here, and I would want you to do something for me. Now, remember, this is just what I did here is just like I would call it more like a pseudocode, right? It's more like a pseudocode. This would not run because there's so many things that we did not put in place. For example, passing in preference, we created a new instance without passing in some of those items. That is because we did not really think about the model, the way the model should look like. But I'm just trying to show you, the way you extend your classes. Also, I think what you should do is just understand that the idea about inheritance is you having like a parent class and a child class, which are like the user, the admin. These are children because you are extending from something which happens to be the parents, right? So that is the concept of inheritance. Let me just give you a take-home assignment in here, and I'm going to share this file with you. So when it comes to things like backend development, sometimes you might be sitting with a client and they just come up with a use case, right, for their business. So let's assume I own a business and I want you to come up with a program that would work for like the different departments I have in my company. So let's say I have a receptionist, I have the managers. I also have the accountants, right? So accountants. I want this accountant. I want you to create a user model. Now this is your own thinking model coming in. The client won't tell you to create a model, of course, but they want to have a system where they have different account levels, right? And the details for these account levels, we should have like give me their first name, last name, their email address, home address, and their department. Okay, so I want this to be like the basic details that every user should have. But for the receptionist, I want the receptionist to be able to make sales. I want the account the managers to be able to analyze operations. So I want them to be able to check out the daily operations and see what is going on in the company. And finally, for the accountants, I want the accountants to be able to just compute sales. So think of something, come up with a very beautiful design, like code design. But at the end of the day, you can just return a bunch of strings telling me that sales has been computed, operations have been analyzed, or the receptionist just made a sale, right? So just come up with a simple model. I want to see your model should be clean. You can apply a bunch of inheritance. You can apply inheritance, of course, to make this look more to make it look reasonable, something I can easily just see the connection between a user and the type of users, right? So by saying something like receptionist is inheriting or extending from the user or something. So come up with something very basic. Put it up on repo.it. So what is repo.it? Let me show you. So this is repo.it. Check it out. repoit.com. I keep making that mistake. So create an account on Repo.it. You can log in. You can create a new. I will share a video on how to use Repo.it, but it's very basic. So you can create a new JavaScript file. Do your work in the JavaScript file. Then we will share a link where you will submit your assignment. Starting from your second month, of course, you should have access to where to post or drop your assignments, and also see updates on the timetable or maybe the curriculum. But for now, just work on Repo.it and share the link with us by the time we drop the link for assignment submission for you, probably tomorrow morning. So just create an account with repo.it, repo.it.com, sorry. And if you don't have an account with GitHub, go ahead and create an account with GitHub. For now, we will start using GitHub very soon. It's something you definitely have to use as a backend developer, and I believe some of you already have an account with GitHub. But if you don't, go ahead and create one right away. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful night. Let's wrap this up and share with you. So, JavaScript class.